So the last 2 days we've been talking about solving quadratic functions. The next method we're going to talk about is completing the square. Okay, so I'm going to give you some steps to kind of outline what we're doing with completing the square. Now, basically, our goal with completing the square is, if you can recall, sometimes we had things that factored and we can write it like x plus or minus something and we could square the whole thing. We want this. That's why we're going to complete the square. We're going to manipulate some numbers. And remember, as long as you do something to one side, as long as you do it to the other side, we're all fair in math. We want to manipulate our functions in order to get something like this. This is our goal. So let me give you some steps, and we're going to follow these steps as we're solving these. Now, the first thing you always want to do is you want to move your constant term to the other side of our equation, Okay, after you've done that, we want to put a brand new constant term for our quadratic function. So we're going to create a new constant term by using this formula. Now, we're going to take the b, remember that's what's in front of our plane x, we're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to square this quantity. So, to create a new constant term, we take our little b, divide it by 2, and square it. So, we're going to create it, then add this to both sides of our equation. This new constant term is the key to what's going to create our perfect square when we complete the square. And remember, as long as you do something to one side, if you do it to the other, then we're all fair. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to factor the left-hand side. Which we're going to use blankety blank for. And the last thing we're going to do is solve. Now, there's one thing I want to remind you of before we get started on this, is remember back in algebra, whenever you took square roots, so let's make a little note here. We're just going to do this as like a little sidebar. Note, whenever you're taking square roots, for example, if I wanted to take the square root of 4, and if you told me that the square root of 4 is 2, you're right. But also, the square root of 4 is negative 2. So whenever we're taking square roots, we need to remember that we get a positive and a negative from this. Now, if you don't believe me, just remember, 2 squared is equal to 4, but also negative 2 squared is equal to positive 4. So because both of those squared gives us positive 4, when we take the square root, we've got to have plus or minus of whatever we're taking, whatever our solution is. So let's do a couple examples of these, and let's work through our steps. So we're going to solve by completing the square. So let's try one of these. Let's take a look at x squared plus 18x, not 18x, excuse me, 8x minus 20 is equal to 0. Okay, so step 1 told us that we want to take our constant term and we want to add it to get it to the other side. Well, in this case, we're going to add. So we're talking about this term right here. That's our constant term. So since it's minus, to get it to the other side, we need to add it. So what we have left on the left-hand side is just x squared plus 8x, and now we have equal to 20, because 0 plus 20 is 20. Now, we need to figure out what is going to be our new constant term. So we're going to take our b. Remember, our b is what's in front of our plain x. So we're going to take b, divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. So for this one, this particular example, we have 8 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. 8 divided by 2 is 4, so we need to square 4, and we get 16. So this is what we're going to add to both sides of our equation. So now we have x squared plus 8x plus 16 is equal to 20 plus 16. So now we can clean up the right-hand side. We know what 20 plus 16 is. So we have x squared plus 8x plus 16 is equal to 36. So step 2 is done. Step 3 says we need to factor the left-hand side. So what we have here is we have a trinomial. We're going to use blankety blank. So set up our blanks. Blank times blank is equal to a, which is 1, times 16. And we get 16 here. Then blank plus blank is equal to our b, which is 8. So we need to fill out our blanks. What two numbers multiply to 16 but add to 8? We get 4 and 4. Now, at a certain point when you get to working on these, you'll be able to kind of skip this step, because where do you see 4? Let's see it right there. So, just a little hint there. Now, we take what's in our blank, we put it over a and our variable. So, we can rewrite that as 4 over x. That's one of our terms. And also, the other one. Most of you guys just know that whenever we have the same blank, whatever we come up with, we have to write twice. So I'm going to come up here to the top of the page, and we're going to list out our terms. So we have denominator, numerator, so we have x plus 4, and then we also have denominator, numerator, so x plus 4. Now, remember that we can rewrite this as x plus 4 squared. And like we were talking about earlier, I'm going to flip back. This is what we want. So we're on a roll here. So I'm going to rewrite this equation right here, but I'm going to replace the left-hand side with what we factored it to. So we have x plus 4 squared, but what was it equal to? 36. So now, the last thing we have to do is we have to solve. Remember, to get rid of something squared, we have to take the square root. This is why we talked about square roots a little bit ago. So we have x plus 4 squared, and we're going to take the square root of it, and then we have the square root of 36. So on the left-hand side, the square root and the square cancel each other out, so we have x plus 4. And remember, the square root of 36, we have to write plus or minus 6. Now, remember when we're doing the quadratic function formula, we took this guy and we wrote it twice. So we've got two different things we got to solve. We got x plus 4 is equal to positive 6, but also x plus 4 is equal to a negative 6. So if we solve both of these, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. So we get x is 2, and then we get x is negative 10. So guess what our two solutions are? 2 and negative 10. So let's start with this example. So step 1 said that we need to take our constant term and move it to the other side. Our constant term this time is negative 11 or minus 11. So to get it to the other side, we're going to add 11 to both sides. So we have x squared plus 4x is equal to 11. Okay. So now we got that taken care of. We need to figure out what our new constant term is. So we take our b. So this is our b. We're going to have 4 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. So we have x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 11 plus 4. So we can go ahead and clean up the 11 plus 4, and we have x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 15. So step 2 is taken care of. We got our new constant. Next thing we need to do is we need to factor at the left-hand side. So we're going to use blankety blank. So we have blank times blank is equal to 1 times 4, which is just 4. Then we have blank plus blank is equal to 4. So we need to think to ourselves, all right, what's going to go in our two blanks? 2 and 2. So we take what's in our blank, we put it over a in our variable, and we get 2 over x, which is one of our terms. Same thing for the other one. So my two terms, I'm going to come up here to the top again. We have x plus 2 and x plus 2. And then we can rewrite that as x plus 2 squared. That was our goal. So now we're going to take this function right here, and we're going to rewrite it, except for on the left-hand side, we're going to write what our polynomial factor to. So we have x plus 2 squared is equal to 15. So this one's not going to be as pretty as the last one. Last step we need to do is we need to solve. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Then we got to take the square root of 15. So on the left-hand side, we're left with just x plus 2. And this is equal to the square root of 15. Now, that's not a pretty number. So let's find the square root of 15 in our calculators. And we're going to leave 3 decimal places. We have 3.873. And don't forget, we got plus or minus of it. So here's where we're going to write our two equations. We have x plus 2 is equal to a positive 3.873. And then we have x plus 2 is equal to a negative 3.873. So when we subtract 2 from both sides, we get x is equal to 1.873. Then we have x is equal to negative 5.873. So our two solutions, they're not pretty this time, but we still got them. Okay, so let's look at this example. First thing we got to do, move that constant term. So we got positive 15 over here, so we need to subtract it from both sides. So we have x squared plus 3x is equal to negative 15. Okay, got that taken care of. Next we need to figure out what our new c is. So we're going to take this b. So we have 3, we're going to divide it by 2. Then we're going to square it. Now, 3 over 2 squared is 9/4. I know you're going, oh my goodness, there's a fraction there. That's okay. We can still add it to both sides. Remember, fractions are numbers too. So if x squared plus 3x plus 9/4 is equal to negative 15 plus 9/4. Alright, so let's go ahead and clean up the right-hand side. So x squared plus 3x plus 9/4 is equal to, and we have negative 15 plus 9/4. Now, what we get here is, if we leave it as a fraction, is negative 51 over fourths. Negative 51 fourths. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, whenever this happens, whenever you've got your trinomial that you know is going to factor to x plus or minus something squared, because that's the way we set up our new constant, and you have it equal to a negative number. So that means that whatever this factors to, when we go ahead and we've got to solve it, if we take the square root of both sides, we're taking the square root of a negative. Taking the square root of a negative, remember when we did the quadratic formula, if our b squared minus 4ac was a negative, we had no real solutions. That's because whenever you take the square root of a negative number, you have imaginary numbers, which we're going to talk about later. So at this point, we're going to stop because there are no real solutions, or roots or zeros. So whenever you move your constant function over, and after you add to it your new c, if you get a negative number, you can stop right there and say no real solutions. Okay, so let's do another example. Now, in our previous examples, the term that was in front of our x squared was 1, but in this example, we have a 2. So we cannot do completing the square if we have a number in front of our x squared. So what we need to do here is we need to go through and we need to take this number, which is 2, and we're going to divide all of the numbers in our problem by 2. So it's like taking the GCF out. That's exactly what we're doing, taking out the GCF. So if we divide by 2, we get x squared minus 4x minus 3. Now, at this point, it's just like we've been doing. So let's finish this one up. First thing we want to do is add our constant function over. Because we have a negative 3, we're going to add it over. And we have x squared minus 4x is equal to 3 now. Then we got to think of our new b. So our new c. So we got to take our b, which is, in this case, negative 4, put it over 2, and then we're going to square it. So that's negative 2 squared, so we get positive 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 3 plus 4. And we can go ahead and we can clean up the right-hand side. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 7. Okay, the next thing we want to do is that third step. We want to factor the left-hand side. So we're going to use blankety blank on this guy. So blank times blank is equal to a times c, so 1 times 4, which is 4. And blank plus blank is equal to b, which in this case is negative 4. So we want to multiply negative 2 and negative 2. And if we add them, we get negative 4. So then we take what's in our blank, put it over a and our variable, which is just negative 2 over x. Same thing for the other one. So here are our two terms. So let's list them up at the top. We have x minus 2 times x minus 2, which we can rewrite as x minus 2 squared. Remember, that's our goal. So now we're going to come back and we're going to rewrite this guy right here, but instead of the trinomial, we're going to put in what we factored it to. So we have x minus 2 squared is equal to 7. So then again, we're not going to have something pretty whenever we go to solve. So let's do the last step. We're going to solve. So we've got to take the square root of both sides. So we have the square root of x minus 2 squared, and then the square root of 7. So on the left-hand side, we just have x minus 2. And remember, whenever we take the square root, we got to have plus or minus, and let's use 3 decimal places. We've got 2.646. So, like usual, let's write our two things based on the plus or minus. So we have x minus 2 is equal to positive 2.646. Then we have x minus 2 is equal to negative 2.646. Alright, so if we add 2 to both sides, we get this x is 4.646, and this one is 0.646. So our two solutions are 4.646 and 0.646. Actually, we forgot our negative sign. So negative 0.646. Sorry about that. So let's do one more example. This one's going to be kind of complicated, so get ready. Okay, here's our last example. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, this one's a little bit of a doozy. But you know what? We'll get through this. So, now just like before on example D, we've got a number in front of our x squared. So we divided everything by whatever that number was. We got to do the same thing here. But this guy isn't going to be very pretty. But that's okay. He's still a number 2. So if we divide everything by 2, we have x squared minus, we can say 3 over 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. Now at this point, we do the same exact steps. Step 1, we're going to move our constant function to the other side. So we're going to add 3 to both sides. So we have x squared minus 3/2 x is equal to positive 3. Okay? Now, we've got to think of our new c. Now, here's where you're probably going, I'm going to cry. That's okay. We'll get through this. So we're going to take our b. So we have negative 3/2. Then we have to divide that by 2 and then square it. So, either you can use your calculator for this, or you can do some old school ways. Either way, you come up with, you put it in the calculator, 9/16. Now, if that as a decimal is 0.5625. And that's okay. Alright, so we're going to take 9/16 or 0.5625. Let's go ahead and use our fractions since we've got our b in fractions, and we're going to add it to both sides. So we're going to have x squared minus 3/2 x plus 9/16 is equal to 3 plus 9/16. So let's clean up the right-hand side. And 3 plus 9/16 is 57/16. I know you guys did that in your head, didn't you? Now, in case you haven't noticed, when we've been doing these and finding our new c's, there's been a number that keeps popping up. I'm going to flip back a couple of problems. Okay, so let's look back at this one. Whenever we factored this one, we ended up getting x plus 4 squared. And where else do you see 4? When you did b divided by 2. Look at the next one. This one we ended up with x plus 2 squared. And whenever we did b divided by 4, we got 2. Now this one, we didn't have a solution. But if you look back here, we ended up with x minus 2 squared. And when we did b divided by 2, we got minus 2. So we're going to use that so you just don't have to use blankety blank with these horrible, terrible fractions, even though they're numbers too. So what we have here, how this factors, is we're going to have x, and then when we divide it by 2, let's see, let's go back in here, right there. If you put in your calculator, because we kind of skipped a step there, this guy, and divided it by 2, before you squared it, you get negative 3/4. So that's what we're going to use right here. So once you notice this pattern, you don't really have to factor. So we have x minus 3/4 squared is what this guy right here is going to factor to. So now, let's come up here to the top. So we have x minus 3/4 squared is equal to 57/16. Ugh, that's okay. Now, last step, we need to solve. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And what we end up with is x minus 3/4. And we get plus or minus. And let's just go ahead and write it as a decimal. Let's make everybody happy. So we've got 1.887. So from here, let's write our two equations, and we're almost done. X minus 3/4 is equal to a positive 1.887. Then we have x minus 3/4 is equal to a negative 1.887. Sorry, I'm running out of room. So when we add 3/4 to both sides, and you can leave your answers as decimals, you get 2.637. And for this one, you get negative 1.137. So here are our two solutions. We have 2.637 and negative 1.137.